guys, welcome back. We're going to take a quick look at the human respiratory system and the key structures that are needed. Just a quick reminder, the whole point of this, gas exchange, aerobic respiration involves gas exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Taking in oxygen, release CO2, we make ATP, and that ATP is the energy we use. The overall process in the respiratory system for humans is basically through the nasal cavity, into the pharynx, past the larynx and trachea, down into the bronchi, which split into two, bronchioles, which split into many, alveoli, which end up being the structure responsible for increasing surface area and bringing gas exchange to the bloodstream. Those things occur in the lungs, and we'll get into this kind of piece by piece here. So the first structure here is the nose or the nasal cavity. The nose or nasal cavity is responsible for warming and filtering air as it enters the body. It also acts as like a little filter with cilia, small hairs, and mucus to catch dust, other irritants to prevent them from going into the trachea or the throat, the pharynx, the lungs, all that stuff. So a nasal cavity is number one here in this section, all right? So this nasal cavity up here. This is your primary air intake, so don't think the mouth is the air intake. The best way to breathe air in plan A for air intake is the nose. The mouth is plan B only when there's just not enough and you have to gulp for air, which is not the standard normal way to breathe. Moving on to the next structure is the pharynx. Now the pharynx is just behind the nasal cavity. What we're looking at in the pharynx is actually structure 7 on this one. So the pharynx is going to be this space back here in structure 7. And what's the purpose of this? It basically is this connection point from the nose or nasal cavity to the trachea. It ends up kind of warming, moistening air further, preventing against damage from food particles. Remember, this is kind of a unique space because it connects to the mouth and the nasal cavity. So this area also has contact with food and is important in the digestive system. So remember, it connects the kind of mouth to esophagus and the nose to the trachea. So this has the thickest mucus layer because it's kind of the most all-purpose kind of space. It's kind of involved in both digestive and respiratory systems. So that's kind of its unique adaptation, is that thicker mucus layer. Moving on further, we're going to move on to a structure that we mentioned in the digestive system again, which is the epiglottis. The epiglottis, important in digestive and respiratory system because, again, they're involved in both. But the epiglottis is essentially a flap that's going to end up connecting covering the trachea when you swallow. So this flap, I think up here is where they put this epiglottis. On your sheet, you should have a different number for that. I think I have number 2 stretched across here for this one. On your sheet. But when you look at this, this flap basically covers across here, and then when you swallow, instead of going down the trachea, it goes into your stomach and the esophagus here. So how's this well adapted? There's flexible cartilage, and that flexible cartilage then covers, as you can see in this animation here, the flap covers and allows the food to not go down your trachea into your lungs, which would be a problem. The larynx is highlighted as number 3 here. So looking at the larynx, you can see this structure in the box here, and it's in the box because we call it a voice box, basically. It has vocal cords, which are made of cartilage, again. It's flexible, they vibrate, and allow regulation of airflow, which is important. And it sits right on top of the trachea, so obviously it helps to regulate how much air can come in and out of the lungs at any given time. So that's the larynx or the voice box, which is commonly referred to as. Moving on to the next one, we're going to be looking at the trachea. Right? So the trachea is a really important player in this whole thing. The trachea is number 8 on our diagram. And this trachea is the airway. Okay, so this is basically the airway. Some people call it the windpipe. It's bringing air from your nose to the lungs, so it's its main transportation tube. It's really important that nothing happens to this tube, because if this gets any kind of trouble, you have no ability to bring air into your lungs. So because of this, it's lined with C-shaped cartilage rings, which give it a lot of structure. It's not just like a garden hose. It has like those cartilage rings to keep it open at all times. So if you put your chin down to your chest and you wonder why you don't get a kink in your throat and you can't breathe like you would with a garden hose, it's because these C-shaped rings keep your trachea and your airway open no matter kind of what you do with your neck here, as long as those rings are functioning. It's also lined with muscle cartilage to kind of help provide that structure and integrity to the trachea. After the trachea, we get to the bronchi. The bronchi basically are just your trachea split into two, but at this point we enter the lungs, all right? So the bronchi, you're going to have two of them here, 5 and 9, all right? So remember, this is the right side because you're looking at a mirror image. This is the left side. So the right bronchi here, okay, comes off right in there, and the left bronchi here. And they kind of come in at a little bit different angles. The left is longer to reach the smaller left lung. The reason for that is to accommodate for the space of the heart, which is more off-center on this side or the left side of the body. So it's kind of right here. The right side, you can see, is a little bit a steeper angle and goes into the right lung. But it divides into two, so obviously we can split the air equally into two lungs, essentially. So that's really important that it's able to do that. After the bronchi, we have the two bronchi, then we get all these bronchioles. All right, so looking at the bronchioles on your diagram, you're going to be 10, and it's just showing it here. Like here would be an example of a bronchiole, but here's some more, here's some more. All right, so they're kind of like branches of a tree, basically. Why is this all important? Well, basically these bronchioles are important because each of these bronchioles connects to our next structure, the alveoli. So the more of these we have, the more alveoli we can have in the lungs, and basically it means there's more surface area to absorb more oxygen and release more carbon dioxide. So the more branches we have, the more surface area we have to allow for gas exchange. So it's important that we continue to divide the bronchi into many, many bronchioles within the lungs. And then we get to, after bronchioles, those alveoli we were just talking about. So checking out alveoli, looking at these guys, this is where the gas exchange actually occurs. So how does the gas from the environment end up in your lungs? It occurs at this point in structure 11, which are these alveoli blown up. Remember, these are going to be attached at the ends of all these bronchioles throughout. Okay. Basically, the air sac allows for gas exchange. They're kind of spongy tissue. They can expand, and they're just wrapped in capillaries, blood vessels. So we can send, at this point, oxygen into the bloodstream and send out carbon dioxide as a result of aerobic respiration and get rid of that and allow our cells to make that ATP that we need. The final structures that are important would be the diaphragm and the lungs. All right, so the lung itself on this diagram would be the right lung, number 4. Okay, but you can kind of see in this animation we get the diaphragm in the structure here and the lungs here. The lungs expand and contract, we know that, but what's the reason for that is the muscle that's running the whole show, which is hardly in this picture here. It's number 6, which is the diaphragm down here. Okay, so how does that work? Well, basically we know lungs contain all of those structures we talked about, the bronchi, bronchioles, alveoli, all that stuff. So how did they expand and contract and fill with air? It's all about this diaphragm that you see here. All right, so what's happening now? On an inhale, we can see this muscle. This would be an inhale, right? So the muscle pulls down, and then when this muscle pulls down, it contracts, it increases the thoracic space and allows air to rush in. When it comes up like this, it's relaxing and it's forcing the air out and making those lungs contract into the exhale. Okay, so it decreases thoracic space. And that's really how the diaphragm allows for the intake and output of air into the lungs. So without the diaphragm working, the lungs aren't going to be able to have too much power to move air in and